Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Dr. Denise Taylor is my guest today, and she is an expert in the field of ESG and sustainability. So we learn about her really fascinating backstory around wolf and animal conservation and how that has kind of led her down the path that she's now on. But we speak about the pros, the challenges, the cons, and everything in between around this massive topic of ESG. Why you should be interested in it, why you need to get on the journey now. And Denise also shares some resources that you can use to do that and make a start. Hope you enjoy this episode. As always, if you do, give us a like, a comment, a share on social media, and we'd love you to hit subscribe on your podcasting platform of choice. Enjoy the episode with Denise Taylor and I. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Denise.
Welcome, it's a pleasure. Good to be here.
Good. So I thought we'd start, because you've got a really interesting and varied background, by talking about wolf conservation and how that has kind of led you down the path of where you are now. Because it's quite an interesting backstory you've got.
Yeah, okay. So I've been doing international wolf conservation for many years, over 30 years. Started when I moved down to the Midlands in England, and there was a wolf conservation organisation here. So met my first wolf, Ayla. Very interesting meeting. They brought her out of the enclosure and she immediately made a beeline for me and sat on my boots and then urinated on my boots and basically marked her territory. So I was then therein afterwards part of the pack. But the conservation work's taken me all over the world and formed the bulk of my PhD around environmental education. So I've had the privilege and the absolute pleasure of just going to all these wonderful wolf projects, and we've supported a project in Bulgaria for many years. I managed to get some grant funding for them. They became part of one of my case study pieces of research to support my PhD around environmental education, because they were doing a lot of great work. And the project in Bulgaria has two facets to it. So it has ambassador species. So at the time it had two ambassador wolves. They've still got two ambassador wolves, different wolves, because obviously I've been doing this for a long time and canes do have a lifespan. Yes. And at the time it had two ambassador bears as well. And when I first got involved in that project, which was 2004, such a long time ago, they were just in the process of building a large carnivore education centre in the beautiful Pirin Mountains, the foothills of the Pirin Mountains. Absolutely gorgeous setting, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site around there, so it's just wonderful. And they bought an old ruined stable block. It was derelict, so it was literally just a few bricks and the perimeter of it on the floor. And there was a project house where we would stay. And they raised the funding to build this large carnivore education centre. Now, this is in a village. It's called Vlaki. It's spelled V-L-A-H-I, but pronounced Vlaki. And it's a small village which was abandoned during the communist regime. Everybody kind of moved out of the villages, and that's been typical of those types of rural areas anyway across Eastern Europe. And people migrated to the cities. So kind of left a semi-abandoned village, and the project settled in there and got the funding, built this wonderful large carnivore education centre, and then started to do a lot of education work around large predators, large carnivores, megafauna, with the aim of protecting them, because there's a lot of persecution still across Eastern Europe. So it's open season on shooting wolves and doing whatever you want to them. They did address that during the time I was working with them. So I happened to be there, very fortunately, on one of my visits. I used to go 2 or 3 times a year, when we picked up Meadow, a brown bear, from the zoo. The project had rescued him. He was a dancing bear and very, very badly treated and in very poor condition. But they didn't have an enclosure for him at the time, so they had to put him in the zoo for a year while they built this gorgeous enclosure in the mountains, stream running through it, perfect for a bear. And he was joined by a mate later. But I happened to be there when we picked him up from Sophia Zoo in a old decrepit van, 20-year-old van, with a big bear emblazoned on the side of it. And we got to the zoo, and the first job was to kind of try and entice this big brown bear into a cage, which we could then load into the back of the van. And there's not much thought process gone into this. It's all very kind of like seat of your pants stuff. So, there was a run through in the zoo where Meadow was, from his enclosure through to another part of the zoo where they could get him into the cage and then into the van. The key was getting him down this kind of like this little tunnel through. So there was honey on sticks and all sorts of stuff going on. It was just such an incredible experience. And Eleanor Sinskarska, who's the project lead on the large carnivores, a good friend of mine now and a colleague, and she didn't want Meadow to be tranquilized. She wanted him to be fully awake, so he wasn't tranquilized, and so we had the job of trying to entice him into the cage, closing the cage, back of van. Anyway, we got to Vlaki. It was a 6-hour journey with a bear in the back of a van, which was interesting. We stopped to give him some water, and I've kind of started my bonding process with him. Because, obviously, in a cage.
Was he fairly calm in the van, or was he sort of?
He was calm in the van, and I managed to hand feed him some water when we stopped, and he was huffing and puffing a little bit. It's a stressful experience for a bear, and he was huffing and puffing a bit, but he needed a drink, and we can't let him out, so we just hand fed him some water, which was an interesting experience, and I kind of felt a connection with him there and then, really. But then we got to the foothills of the mountains. So you go up from Kresna, which is the main town, down at the bottom of the mountain. It's a main town from Sofia through to Greece, so it's on a big main road. And then you turn off, and then you go up a mountain track. Basically, it's a very rough mountain track. So you're basically taking your life in your hands, as far as I was concerned, going up this. It's a scary experience. And then you have to cross a little river, and then you end up in the village. The enclosure is, and it's still there, is further up in the mountain, up an even rougher track. There's boulders everywhere and everything. So the van clearly wasn't going to make it up the latter part of the track. It was just too rough. And so we had to stop in the village and transport the bear onto the back of a low loader, which in itself, they hadn't thought this through. So rigging this up, trying to get the bear from the back of the van onto a low loader, was the solution was to back the low loader up against, it was like a low concrete structure. I think it must have had a building on it at some point. So it's like a block of concrete, and the bed of the concrete just lined up with that. So, and then the van could drive round onto the top. Then they got these 2 or 3 big planks of wood. Bearing in mind, this cage must have weighed probably as much as the bear, and you've got a bear which is about a ton. So you've got a pretty hefty load to offload onto the back of this truck, and they had these planks of wood, and like half a dozen men to do this. So that was, and a pissed off bear. Sorry, can I swear? And a fed up bear. By this time, Meadow had had enough, and he was getting quite stressed. So then we got him onto that. That worked. That was an experience. And then we got him up to the enclosure. Managed somehow to get the cage into the enclosure, and then everybody kind of like stood back and thought, okay, how do we get the bear out of the cage without somebody getting mauled? So it lifts up. It's one of those where it's a big cage, you lift the trap door. And they're a very resourceful bunch of people up in those mountains. They're very incredibly handy in building and constructing things. So they constructed an A-frame with ropes and pulleys, and so they could pull the cage up, and that was that. So that was good. So that was part of the experience.
Yeah. Wow.
Meadow emerged. He was very cautious and started to explore the enclosure. There's electric fencing. It's chain link enclosure, concrete base, chain link, big enclosure. It's quite big, much better than you'd get in a zoo, and quite a lot of space. And kept coming up against the electric fencing, but zapping his nose a little bit. So he soon learned that there's no fencing, but he was still testing each part of the fence to see where he could get out. Now, part of this project, the other part of the project, as well as the large carnivores, is they breed livestock guarding dogs. And the reason they breed livestock guarding dogs is to give away breeding pairs of puppies to farmers who use them obviously to protect livestock, and that then increases the tolerance towards large predators because they're very, very effective. These dogs have been used for thousands of years. The breed of dog nearly died out during the communist regime when they had the collective farms, but this particular project was resurrecting them, and that's run by Eleanor's husband Cedar Sadevchev and his brother and various other people. As part of this project, they also have the rare breeds of Karakachan sheep. So they have, I think it's about 250, 300 sheep now. So the livestock guarding dogs live with the sheep. They grow up with the sheep from puppies. They're with them constantly. They go up to pasture. So what happens is the dogs and the sheep go up to pasture every day, past the bear enclosure, past the wolf enclosure, and then come back down in the evening. So by the time we'd got Meadow into the enclosure, it was getting towards evening. Dogs coming down off mountain, see a predator in their midst. So the dogs went crazy. Meadow was going, he's quite stressed, even though he's in a really nice enclosure. He was exhibiting stress behavior. And he just wanted to escape. So he was looking at ways out of this enclosure, getting away from the dogs. And he spotted a part of the fence that didn't have enough electric wiring on it, that because we were in the mountain, the concrete base had dipped down and there was this bear-shaped triangular space that was just there, waiting to be kind of charged at and whatever. And the guys realized this, and Cedar and the crew said, right, we'll go and get some more electric fencing and rig that up. But in the meantime, can you stand there? This was to my colleague, a guy called Chris Senior. Can you stand there and make sure Meadow doesn't come through that gap in the fence? And the accepted wisdom, whether you believe this or not, is if you're confronted with a bear and you're not going to get away quick enough, you make yourself look big and scary to certain bears. Doesn't work with every species of bear, apparently.
Right. Okay.
But the method was to make yourself look big and scary. And Chris is a huge, he's quite a big, bulky guy. He's about 6 foot, but he's a big, solid guy. So Chris was, okay, I can do that. And of course, Meadow charged at the fence.
Oh God!
And nearly came through. There were rivets popping out of the concrete base and all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
At which point Chris promptly fainted. Meadow didn't escape, so it was good. But that whole experience was just amazing, and all my conservation workers take it not quite as intense as that situation, but I've been to places like the Northwest Territories in the middle of nowhere, 250 miles away from any sort of civilization, and we had wolves in camp all week, and that was a huge privilege. They were with us at the time. 3 wolves, a female and her yearling cubs, who were full grown by that point, kept coming into camp. And literally I've got an amazing photograph above my fireplace, and I was literally 6 feet away from her when she came into camp, and she was very curious and looking at what's going on, nervous but curious, because she saw us as a food source. So that was a really great encounter as well. So so I've been to Russia, been all over the place. So and that's driven my real passion for biodiversity, which then
Yeah.
subsequently has driven the passion for biodiversity. For me, is a huge part of
Yeah.
sustainability. It's,
Yeah.
climate change and biodiversity are our two biggest threats.
Yeah.
And so, we don't hear a lot about, we do on a certain level if you're in certain circles, but the biodiversity doesn't get as much attention as
No.
climate change and net zero.
Yeah.
And it's the
No.
thing that suffers the most. So, when you've got a development, as our current government is, let's build, 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 it's wildlife that suffers, and
Yeah.
it's biodiversity and habitats that suffer, and
Yeah.
that will be to our detriment in the long term.
Mm. Mm. Fantastic. Well, that's a great. I love that. I love that story when you told me it before. So I thought we've got to include that. And interested to hear from the audience. How on earth would you risk assess and mitigate risk
There was none.
in that endeavor? So yeah, the most creative post on LinkedIn talking about that story and how you could mitigate those risks. I'll give
Yeah,
some kind of
yeah.
prize to.
I
So
think probably a lot will have changed now because
yeah,
Bulgaria did join the EU. But I've been to Russia as well, and I've been in the wilds of Russia. We were out in, I did go to Moscow, and that was an amazing experience as well. But we were literally out with the locals, and again in abandoned villages, and the resourcefulness of the people out there is just incredible. We were in a Land Rover driving somewhere. I think we were going to check on. There'd been an incident of a wolf attacking some sheep somewhere, and we had quite a long drive, and they're dirt tracks, and the Land Rover broke down, and it's, you can't just call the AA or the RAC out
no,
there. You're in the middle of Russian forest, and you've got to
yeah,
you've got to deal with it. And so they did. I think
yeah,
it was the fan belt that had gone or something like that, but they
right, okay,
fixed it. And I'm
yeah.
like stood there in the middle of this forest, thinking, God, we're never going to get home. Thankfully, I was with people who kind of knew how to survive in
Knew what
those
to do.
situations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. Well, you obviously made it because you're here today. So
Yes. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
all is good. So great to have you on and to talk a bit more about sustainability.
Yeah.
The audience is going to be mostly sort of safety professionals. So I suppose as a starting point, how would you say that safety and sustainability kind of intersect or relate to one another? But perhaps in ways that are maybe a bit unexpected or maybe ways that people might not recognize immediately. So something,
Yeah.
a bit interesting or different or unique about how those two
How
topics
they
intertwine.
interact. Yeah,
Mm.
I think it's multifaceted. So what you see when there's a big push at the moment to have a sustainability manager. If you're any size of
Yeah,
business, you have to have a sustainability manager. And what typically happens at the moment is they either give that role to the environment manager or they give it to the H&S manager because they see
yeah,
that as a natural extension. And typically a business will have had to put in health and safety policies and processes and procedures and everything else. And so they see that as a natural extension of that. They
mm,
see putting sustainability policies and action plans in place as a natural extension, and to a large extent it is. And then you've got the other side of it, which is coming under legislation and governance. So if you're going to be sustainable, governance is a key issue, and all the policies across governance, HR, health and safety, environmental, all of those policies and processes come under sustainability. And I think
yeah,
this is one of the key things that's missed in the conversations is sustainability goes across every facet of your organization. You
mm,
think of the value chain and your supply chain, sustainability is across everything. And when you then break it down in health and safety, you're coming back to keeping your employees safe, and then it becomes a social aspect of ESG, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
So to have that properly put in place, and you can demonstrate governance and social good, and keeping your employees safe and happy, and your suppliers safe and happy, and your
mm,
anybody you come into contact
yeah,
with from a health and safety point of view, um, then that's really important. So it's all interconnected and
mm,
interrelated. But
mm,
environment managers and health and safety managers, and to a certain extent quality managers, are all used to process. They're all used to policy. They're all used
yeah,
to putting action plans in place. And
Yeah.
so that does seem to be a natural fit if you
Mm.
don't employ a CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer. And
Yeah.
when we do the training, we tend to train up those people into that
Okay.
role.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Interested to get your view, because I feel from a safety perspective that over the years, what we've seen is kind of things getting added on and added on and
Yeah,
added on, and
yeah,
obviously that sort of to some extent dilutes your time, and obviously you can set that
yeah,
off against technology and productivity
yeah.
and things like that. But I mean, would you say that in your experience, um, the best option would be to have a standalone sustainability lead if you could afford one,
Yeah.
obviously?
Yeah, if you can afford one, I'd always advocate that. But then it depends on the size of your business, and it also depends on your industry.
Yeah,
So, from a health and safety point of view, there are some industries that need a health and safety manager more than others. So,
sure.
professional services business basically don't need very much of that. But
Mm.
when you're in construction and you've got site managers and project managers and everything else going on, and there's a lot of risk,
Yeah.
and in certain manufacturing industries, there's risk.
Mm.
I did a factory tour yesterday. I'm not going to mention the name of the factory, but it's in automotive. And, I had to wear safety boots and I had a lovely pink high vis coat on. And then when I
Yeah.
went into the bit where they did the gluing and bonding and everything else, I had to put another overall on. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then I have to stay within these lines. I love factory visits, they're great. So you stay within the yellow zones and all of that kind of stuff. So, it's, if you've got that kind of scenario, then you probably need to keep your health and safety manager focused on health and safety and
Mm.
have an additional CSO, because at
Yeah.
that level, with that size of business.
Yeah.
And that particular factory I went to yesterday, coincidentally, it was the health and safety lead who had the job of looking at
Okay. Yeah.
sustainability. And
Hmm.
this is quite a big company. So
Yeah.
there's still some evolution to be done, but everybody's playing catch up, and sustainability is still not seen by a lot of companies in its broadest sense. We're still on this net zero mantra, this tunnel vision of net
Yeah.
zero, decarbonisation. And
Yeah.
although businesses do a lot of the other stuff that comes under the environment, social governance, they're not articulating that properly in strategy. And so there's still quite a way to go,
Mm.
to get
Mm.
supply chains all lined up.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned the kind of net zero. What's the best words to use here? The word that comes
Tunnel
to my mind
vision.
is the word that comes to my mind is crusade, but I don't know if that's the right
Yeah,
if that has negative connotations. But
yeah.
um, and it seems to me like in the last, well, since the Ukraine war, I guess, and energy price spikes and things like that, there seems to be a bit of pushback against that. Is there a risk that that sort of, because we've kind of hitched our wagon to that issue above others, seemingly,
The
and there's a bit of pushback on that,
decarbonisation.
yeah,
Yeah,
is that going to cause us a problem in terms of the overall progress around sustainability?
I think there's a lot going on in the net zero conversation. So a lot of companies are never going to reach net zero. So net zero is designed for countries, not companies.
Yeah,
So it would be virtually impossible to have no emissions if you're a business making or doing anything of that nature. So, and
yeah,
then you get into the whole controversial territory of offsetting and carbon
mm,
credits and all of those controversial issues at the moment, because that's still not been bolted down properly, and there's a lot going on that's not good practice at all.
mm,
But in terms of climate change, yes, we do need to decarbonize, and it's not just carbon; it's the greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot going into the atmosphere that we do need to reduce. It's having
mm,
impact. It's having effect, and so we do need to reduce that. So we need to stay on that journey, and I don't think it's going to go, because I think we'll evolve and mature.
mm,
And the more people start to understand sustainability in its broadest sense, and there's a huge education piece to do. That's what we're doing at the moment. We're only a small organisation, but
yeah,
there's a huge journey to go on. And when when we implemented things like ISO 14001, everybody was like, oh, where are we going with this? But now it's standard practice to have ISO
yeah,
14001. So it's
yeah,
that kind of journey, and there's still
mm,
standardization trying to be put into place.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should lose it because of the climate change issues. I think we need to change the narrative on it and broaden it. And for me personally, I think there's a lot of noise even around sustainability, because when you break it down, what are you asking companies to do? You're asking them to be responsible, you're asking them to be ethical, and you're asking them to do basically their due diligence and good governance. That's what business should be doing anyway.
Yeah, correct.
So I think we're kind of caught up in all this, and when we talk to our clients, it's like you just need to be sustainable, ethical, and responsible. If you get all that right, you're going to be sustainable anyway.
Yeah.
Because you're doing the right thing. Ethics covers that broad spectrum, doesn't it? And being responsible, would you want to pollute your local environment in your community if you're a construction company? It's you've got to make those decisions based on those kind of values, I guess is the word.
Yeah. Had a really interesting discussion over 2 podcasts with a guy called Simon Casson about ethics in health and safety. And he sort of opened my eyes to different ways of thinking. For example, if you want to mitigate risk on a construction project, one of the things you might do is say, right, you can't bring your car into the car park because we're going to mitigate that risk of someone getting run over or whatever. But he said, well, where's that car then going to go? It's going to go into a local side street, and you're then putting other people at risk instead. So it's really interesting.
Potentially a child, running across the road or something like that. There's always trade-offs. In sustainability, there's always trade-offs. So you might have something that you want to implement that's, and electric vehicles are a classic example, aren't they? So we're moving away from combustion engines, but then we're taking rare earth minerals out of the ground, and there's all those mining issues and everything else. And in the long run, it might save on the carbon emissions, but at what cost? And so all of these are trade-offs that you have to, and leaders have to make some pretty bold decisions and really understand what that means. If they take an action, what's the knock-on effect of that? And then you're coming back to systems thinking and feedback loops and all of those things that are explored in sustainability. If you study in any depth, you've got all that going on. And to be honest, businesses don't operate in that way. They don't. Most of them don't have this systems thinking approach.
No.
But that's what you're talking about. If you do this here, what's the feedback? What is the impact down the line?
Yeah. Very, very interesting to think about all the different facets that you have to consider here. So if we're thinking about ESG, broadly, what's at stake for organizations that don't prioritize that? What are some of the potential consequences of not doing this stuff?
And again, it's depending on where you are in your industry sectors. And for certain sectors, if the supply chains, the companies in the supply chains don't adhere to this stuff, they risk losing contracts. So there's a commercial risk there. And the legislation's only increasing at the moment. There's been some rollback on it this week, so they've diluted some of it, like the CSRD and things like that. So they've diluted it, but the direction of travel is still, we still need tighter regulations, because at the end of the day, we face existential threats. That's the ultimate threat. When you look at risk and you look at how much climate change is impacting on businesses and how it's impacting on businesses. So you take Los Angeles with all the wildfires, how many businesses have been impacted by that? Those businesses in those industrial areas over there and elsewhere, if they're exporting to UK, Europe, over the world, is that disrupting supply chains? Is that component you need to finish that car? And I've just seen it to where I went on the factory visit yesterday. They're waiting for some panels. It's disrupted the whole supply chain. They've stopped, production slowed down. These are all the effects. So, if you don't start to look at this more seriously as a business, then you risk the future of the business. Ultimately, it sounds really dramatic, but if you're not getting the contracts because you can't demonstrate your ESG credentials, And I go to conferences all the time, and in aerospace, last year Rolls-Royce and Collins Aerospace, two of the key players in our markets here, stood up and said, this is really serious for us. We've got EcoVadis, which is a sustainability ESG accreditation. It's like a benchmarking accreditation. It demonstrates your ESG credentials, asks you all the questions, and then you have to pass certain scores to get bronze, silver, gold. But there are tier ones and primes in those supply chains asking their suppliers to have EcoVadis. Otherwise, you won't get the contracts. And if your business is built on an aerospace contract, if you're concentrated in those areas, then you risk not having a business. And people are not waking up to this, which is what I'm talking about at the moment in the series of webinars I'm doing on Unlock Your Contract Potential. There's the risk, but there's also the opportunity, because if you get it right, and remember, it's about being responsible, ethical, and good governance, which you should be doing anyway. You can differentiate yourself in those supply chains and that marketplace, because you're saying, I'm a great business, you can trust, you're in good hands with us, you can trust us to get the job done. We've got the capacity, we've got the resilience, we're here for the long haul, we've done all the right things.
So you mentioned that there are organizations that aren't sort of doing this. Is that because there's a knowledge gap, or is it because there's a kind of philosophical disagreement, or what's preventing and blocking this?
It's a complex mix of too much noise around net zero, so that people are switching off. They, at the moment, in certain industries, and I've spoken to lots of manufacturing businesses and been to exhibitions, they're saying, we don't have to do this, we're not feeling the pressure. Nobody's putting pressure on us just yet. We're not big enough to comply with legal requirements.
Right, okay,
we don't have to do any mandatory reporting. Our supply chain hasn't asked us for this yet, but we're seeing that's changing. I'm seeing that increasingly now, even in services industries. So we've got a couple of clients who are facilities management companies, and they are being asked to prove their credentials by their customers, who are the large corporates. But there's still quite a lag in terms of, no, we're not being asked to do it yet, but that's changing. And I think this year in particular, with the legislation, even though it's being watered down, the corporates are still on that journey of, we've got to get this right. It's not going to go away. They might water it down and kick it into the future a little bit more, but it's not going away. That's for sure. And consumers now want more from the companies they buy from. So if you're in a supply chain and you've got a consumer at the end of it who wants you to be acting in an ethical and green way, and then you've got the investment houses who are, they want to have support businesses that are doing the right thing. The banks are all saying you can have preferential rates if you have a green, ethical, responsible, sustainable business. Here's some preferential rates for you, and we'll help you with your capital investment with much better terms. So it's not going away.
And is there, or to what extent is there a risk of sort of greenwashing and slipping kind of over that line? So how can you sort of prove you're meeting the ESG expectations, sustainability expectations, without kind of being perceived as greenwashing?
Straightforward. But we've still got a lot of greenwashing. There is some legislation to stop that now. So if you are greenwashing and you're of a certain size and you come under scrutiny, then you risk fines and even in some instances, jail time, basically.
Okay, well, that's good. I didn't know about that.
So it's still kind of, I don't think it's fully enforced yet, but if you're a large corporate and you kind of breach those ethical codes and boundaries and you are greenwashing, you can get seriously taken to task, and then that damages your reputation as well. So you've got reputational damage. And there are a few companies who've been in the media, I'm not going to name any, but they've been in the media over the past couple of years where they've had modern slavery in their factories and treating their staff abysmally. And And that's just one aspect of it, and been really
Mm.
taken to task. And people are boycotting these companies.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
what's happening with Tesla right at the moment? Tesla's bombed,
yeah,
because
yeah.
it's ethics. It's
Mm.
ethics.
Yeah,
And they're seeing what's going on, and
mm.
we talk about key people of interest on the DEMP program, and look at how his reputation's really bombing at the moment
Yeah,
because he's being seen to not have that ethical good governance.
yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I often speak about safety in the same way that, people have an expectation that you're going to do the right thing.
Yeah,
And, I suppose modern slavery is kind of related to that, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
It's the lack of
And in
safety
answer
is a
to
key
your
element.
question
Yeah,
as well, I didn't fully answer your question. The way you can demonstrate that you're not greenwashing is to have a really strong action plan in place. And
yeah,
that starts with, this is what we do, this is our core business. So you start with your strategy. Where do you want to go? Where are you now? Where do you want to go? How do you get there? And then from that, you get a really detailed action plan and roadmap. And
yeah,
if you do your action plan right and you implement it, it's like any quality standard, which a lot of people in business are familiar with. You've got that plan, do, act kind of mentality where you implement things, and you can prove it, and you've got the evidence to back it up.
yeah,
So we help our clients to put those action plans in place where they can back it up. They've got evidence, and we do a gap analysis. So if they haven't got that evidence or they can't demonstrate that, then the next step is, that's your action. You need to
right.
go away and do this. That's your action.
Yeah,
And then you've got the roadmap with your statements of intent in the longer term. And
mm.
if you're doing that properly, you won't be greenwashing, because you can put out the really good stuff about what you're doing. So if you are acting in a really sustainable way, and you're doing some great stuff, and you're looking at all the stuff across your value chain, like you're looking at getting alternative raw materials with low impact, you're innovating, you're doing all these wonderful things. You've got your philanthropic end of it, where you're doing stuff for charity. Your staff are, you've got a great culture, all those things. Why would you not want to shout about it? And you don't need to greenwash.
Mm.
You don't need to greenwash if you're doing it right.
Yeah, yeah. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
Um, so it sounds like, as with lots and lots of things, probably most things, the key thing here to get started is to have that strategy and do that thinking
yeah,
and figure out like where you want to be and where you
yeah.
are now. And yeah.
Yeah, at least start with an action plan.
Mm.
Um, and so one of the things we do on our website, there's a free tool. It's underpinned by, which we both know, that lovely tool called Score app.
Yes, yeah,
That is a really great, fantastic tool. So we've done an assessment. It's an ESG journey assessment, and we have a staircase. So as part of our business model and the delivery of it, we have a staircase model that goes from pre-compliance, and then there's various criteria in that. Then you've got beyond compliance, it's all color coded, what you need to do to meet that. Or then you've got compliance, then you've got beyond
yeah,
compliance, then you've got integrated strategy, and then you've got purpose-led business.
right.
And they've all got their little kind of action points underneath that as to what is a purpose-led business. Well, you're demonstrating embracing circular economy principles, for example. You've got strong leadership, you've got people in place who are doing this, you've got a strong, all of those things that you would expect in a purpose-led business. So what we've done is taken that sustainability staircase to measure where companies are at the moment, and they can just do a quick quiz. I think it's 28 questions, and just
Yeah,
get this really nice report on, here you are now, these are the next steps.
nice. Well, we'll definitely include a link to that in the show notes for people to
Yeah,
give
thank
that a
you.
go. Yeah, big fan of those kinds of like little
Yeah,
quizzy self-assessment things. I think they add
yeah. It
a lot of
cuts through
value.
the noise, doesn't it? Because at the moment, the noise is all there. People are, one of the key things I get told by, especially in the manufacturing sector, is we don't even know where to start with this stuff because there's just so much noise and confusion around it all. Where do we
Yeah,
begin?
yeah,
Um, and
mm,
and the beginning is, let's have a look at where you're at now, and then you can see where your gaps.
yeah. That makes sense. What would be one kind of common mistake that organizations make when they approach this topic, and how could they go about avoiding that?
The first mistake is not doing anything, like not recognizing it and not being open-minded to it, because there's a lot of somebody said it on the webinar I ran this morning, there's a lot of heads in sand right now. They think it'll go away. And that's understandable because businesses are facing so much pressure right now. You know, we've got cost of living crises, there's pressure coming from all sorts of angles. They've just had that rise in NIC, which is affecting a lot of businesses who employ staff. You know, everything's lots of pressure coming from all angles. So a lot of them see ESG and sustainability as just another headache. And think it will go away, and it won't. And that's the first mistake. And then going on from there is not doing the right processes to really look at this. And it's like any business strategy. It's as simple as that. Make it sound simple. You need to know where you are. You need to know what the gaps are, and you need to know where you're going. And it involves the leadership. So if the leadership isn't bought into this, then it will fail, because the leaders have got to really get behind this in order to demonstrate it across the business operations. Because if that doesn't happen, then you're not going to take advantage of the benefits that it can bring. And there are benefits. We have a couple of slides we do and some modules that we do in our teachings. There's the risks and there's the opportunities. And the risks, you know, businesses are used to dealing with risk. They've got policies. Health and safety deals with risk, but then it's easy to forget that the opportunities are on the other side of that. And what can you do? So you don't take the time to understand all of that. That's the mistake.
Sometimes people jump to seeing risk as purely a negative thing, whereas I would look at risk as risk as a neutral word, because, you know, yes, there could be drawbacks, but there could be massive opportunities as well. And the risk is the uncertainty. It doesn't mean that it's a bad uncertainty necessarily.
It's a bad thing, but there's also the risk of, if you don't do it, what's the risk then? Because the risk if you don't take action could be far greater than the risk itself, if that makes sense.
And that's the interesting. I was going to ask actually about this. That's the interesting sort of challenge, isn't it? That you've got to balance all these trade-offs and think about, you know, sustainability, ESG related goals with commercial realities. You spoke about cost of living and inflation, and tough economic times, NIC, and all this other stuff. So it's kind of like, where do you, you know, how do you square that circle? You know, do you put your head in the sand at one end, or do you go all guns blazing at the other end? And probably there's a middle ground. Any thoughts on?
There's a mid ground, and it all comes back to where the business is and which industry they're in, and the leadership appetite for this stuff. So, you know, typically a company will come to us with this net zero message. We've got to do our carbon calculations. We've got to have a net zero plan, and then we kind of open up wider thinking to them, and therein then you see the opportunities. So we, you know, as a result of doing all this, we've had companies who've got King's Awards. It's the highest kind of award you can get in the UK. It's the highest accolade. And you can imagine what will, you know, double page spread in the Financial Times, thank you very much, because we've won the King's Award. What effect is that going to have on your bottom line when you've suddenly got orders coming in through the door for your product, because you've got all this exposure? You know, it's all the stuff that, you know, the program that we've both been on, the Dent Global, talks about. You know, it's getting in that media, it's being seen, it's all of that kind of stuff. So you know, you've got to think about those things as well, I think, and where it can take you, and, you know, get away from that head in the sand thinking. And yes, we do all have pressures, but if you do this properly and really integrate it into your operations, which it should be anyway, not, you know, I've said in this conversation, it's about being responsible, ethical, and having good governance. It's good business practice is where this is at. And if you get that right, then, you know, you're looking at longevity, but it has to be embedded. And the other thing too, businesses kind of don't understand at first is it's a journey, it's not a destination.
Yeah.
We're all struggling to get on this journey. Every size of business knows they need to do something. Some do it well already, some articulate it well already, others have not started the journey yet, but it is a journey, and you're not expected to get there. The net zero targets are down the line, another 25 years down the line. And so you can't be expected to get there quickly, and you've got to work with the resources that you've got. And so you can do an action plan that says, in this next year, we'll tick off the quick wins. We'll look at what we're already doing. And most businesses are already paying a fair wage. They're potentially doing stuff with their staff and, looking after their staff well and things like that. And there's quick wins you can do around that. And you start to go down the different parts of the action plan. They're probably ticking off quite a few anyway. There's a lot of quick wins from the outset because businesses are already doing it. They just don't articulate it, and they don't see it as sustainability.
Yes.
And as I said earlier, sustainability is across every part of your organization. It's just a buzzword and a different
one of the things in safety is to try and stop this habit of putting the word safety in front of something else. Because actually safety should just be part of what you're doing. So don't speak about having a safety culture, just speak about having a good culture, which includes safety. And I think there's some resonance with that and what you're saying.
And I think that's true, that there is a lot of resonance with that. And so if you know that, and then you can go on to, okay, you've got our stretch goals. We own our premises, we can put solar or wind power in, and they're long-term aims that bring down your carbon emissions, and you can get investment for that. Or if you want to we've got a client who makes outdoor furniture from recycled plastic, so they're already sustainable, but they got some investment to get new machines in to bring that even further. So they've really streamlined their production processes, which has had a really positive effect on their sustainability, their ESG goals, and getting their carbon emissions down. It's made them more efficient, made them more effective. It's going to reduce costs in the long run, all those things. Better for the staff because it's easy machines to operate.
So it all makes perfect sense, as we've been saying. So just conscious of time, starting to wrap us up. Looking to the future, is there anything that is coming down the track, or you think might be coming down the track, that particularly excites you in this space? And then on the other hand, is there anything, as an example, political instability that maybe you're fearful about that could be a sort of existential threat to the kind of ESG movement?
Yeah, I mean, there is that existential threat geopolitically at the moment, isn't there? But I don't think we can just stop everything because we've got that, that threat hanging over us. We've been through Cold Wars, and my dad was in the Cold War, and we've been through all of that before. But I think it's still there at the back of people's minds. The key thing with the geopolitical movements at the moment is the supply chain disruptions and what that means commercially for businesses. So that's the immediate real threat, I think. Excitingly, coming down the line, we're seeing increasing legislation, but for me personally, I want to move more into, how can we do a lot better by doing good, and I want to move more into that realm of business and biodiversity, or the business of biodiversity, and that exciting world of, that value chain, bringing that value chain to life, from resources right through to product end of life cycle, and mapping that so that companies really understand their impacts, and doing that in a really engaging way. And the way we're going to do that is through AI and immersive technologies. So AR, VR, really bring that to life. But then that will hopefully encourage businesses to do a lot more from a biodiversity point of view, because as well as climate change, that's an existential threat. And, businesses already, the quick wins for businesses right now on biodiversity is, if you've got factory premises, you can green those premises today for very little cost and have a beneficial effect. on, pollinators, depending where you are. I've been around so many factories that you walk out the back door and they've got this lovely green space that nobody goes in or bothers
Yeah.
about. And there's so many of those, and you've got concrete car parks that you could just put, gorgeous planters out in, or you could have parts of the premises that have got raised beds for growing, food for the staff or whatever it is. There's lots of initiatives you can do around biodiversity that would have benefit for the environment, benefit for the staff, benefit for the business because they can tick their ESG boxes. And so that's, for me personally, that's an exciting move, and that's where we're kind of heading this year. If I can get some, further investment into the business, I want to develop this, the value chain mapping out with the biomes, and you can go into a particular biome. We've got, half a dozen or so biomes in the world, forests and deserts and all of that kind of stuff, and really bring it to life. Where are your minerals coming from, and what does that mean, and what can you do to mitigate that, so that they understand it.
Fantastic. So we've mentioned the quiz or the assessment. I can't remember what you call it now, but
it's the ESG it's ESG journey assessment.
That's it. Perfect. So we've talked about the assessment. You've mentioned doing some webinars, but feel free to sort of share a bit about the business, some of the stuff you're up to, and how people can kind of learn a bit more or get involved with what you're doing.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of information on our website, and we're just about to put up, we've just done a really nice graphic on all our products and services. What I'm interested in at the moment is getting as many businesses as we can on the journey, whether or not they work with Wild. So the starting point is that ESG journey assessment, and get on the journey, at least understand where you're at, and that's helping as many businesses as possible. And then the education piece is through our workshops, our webinars. We're an online learning business as well. We're a training business. We're an IEMA accredited training provider. IEMA is the main sustainability qualification. So if you're a sustainability manager, you generally have IEMA in. So if you need to upskill your staff, put them through the training, basically. And then from there, our core business is putting strategies in place and helping businesses to implement them. So we work with a supply chain partner. We're just putting together a really exciting package around that value chain mapping, supply chain mapping, and building sustainable supply chains, how we can all work together to have sustainable supply chains. But I'd really encourage people to just come and do the free quiz, just get started. And then if you want a conversation with me, book a discovery call.
Perfect. Great. Well, thanks so much, Denise. Really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and definitely got me thinking. And I'm going to go away and take your assessment as well and get
good.
Let
me know how you get on with that. Let me know how you get on. But thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you and to your audience as well. So we need to get this message out as far and wide as we possibly can.
Well, we've done a small part in that today.
All these small actions add up to bigger things, don't they? Bigger impacts.
Perfect. So that's a great lesson for us to finish on. So great.
Yeah,
thanks, Denise.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.